Should schools be blocking access to generative AI tools? I'm here with Gary Henderson, Director of IT at a large independent school here in the UK, to chat about this contentious issue. Thanks for being here, Gary. So, just to start us off, what is the argument for blocking generative AI tools like ChatGPT within the education setting?
I think there are various kind of arguments. I mean, probably one of the most valid ones is risks regarding kind of inappropriate content, etc. You know, there are, through the likes of generative AI tools, access to such content. So in relation to kind of filtering and monitoring, it's something we need to consider, that risk that an AI tool, student may not be able to kind of Google search, or filtering might be in place there, but students may then seek to use, one of the large language models or multimodal tools to access either imagery and even video now, as well as text content that's inappropriate. So there's that side of things. I think there's some fear regarding the kind of cheating and academic integrity side of things, and I think that's maybe a little bit less clearer and something that I think education needs to explore. There's concerns about that, a reliance on AI might lead to shallower thinking and a reduction in the kind of quality of learning. I think that there are definitely risks. I however, I'm not kind of in the camp that would suggest blocking. I think we're better to educate and explore and seek to use AI carefully, of course.
It's interesting because you mentioned the filtering and monitoring standards, really key part of KCSIE for the past couple of years. Does that standard force schools to block generative AI?
For me, I think that the filtering and monitoring, it does sort of make that comment about it's schools' decision as to, and it highlights certain content types that should be blocked, things like pornography, etc. But other than that, it says it's very much for schools to make that decision. So it's very much for schools to undertake a kind of risk-based decision-making. And I think with AI, it's the same. It's what are the potential benefits of using these tools? What are the risks, and do the risks outweigh the benefits? Also, in terms of the risks, are there things we can put in place, such as education and working with the students to mitigate risks? I think it's very much about that.
So what does that mitigation look like in practice if we're not blocking generative AI tools?
I think education, I actually, looking at filtering and monitoring, I actually think that technically, I totally agree with the filtering standards and keeping children safe in education, etc. We need to protect students, but in the technological world, with VPNs, with proxies, with students with a mobile phone in their pocket, the protection methods are pretty weak. And we've already seen that with the online safety bill, with the introduction of age verification. So age verification on pornography sites gets introduced, and some VPN providers are reporting kind of 1,400% increases in usage immediately following that. The technical issues, which focus on privacy, etc., sort of run counter to what we're trying to achieve, and there's not much we can do about that. So I think it's very much about that the education side of things, and that's filtering and monitoring digital citizenship in general, but also the generative AI side of things and the AI side of things. It's about that education, discussing it with the students. What are the risks? What are the benefits? How do we use it effectively? How do we use it ethically, safely, etc.? It's about having those conversations.
There's a really strong argument that if it's going to be part of their lives and their careers in the future, training and learning about it is really important now.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at not blocking access to generative AI tools, what steps can schools take to better control, to monitor, to filter, to keep that control, considering the current curriculum and expectations of students?
I think the key here is that when I suggest that we don't block it, what I'm not saying is we allow access to every single tool and we don't do anything. I think it's worth, we should be monitoring it. And the funny thing is, if we go back to filtering and monitoring, and within the standards talks about physical monitoring. So in other words, are the teachers asking students about how they've used it? Are they watching when they're using it in the classroom and having those discussions? So I think there's a bit there. If we're looking at it, I would say start at a governance level. What is the school's risk appetite? You might be in a school that's risk averse, in which case you're probably going to go down the road of block it. We want to stay away from it. We want to keep it outside the doors. But therefore we acknowledge we're not going to benefit from any of the potential of AI tools. If you're risk embracing, you might go the other way and go, right, we're allowing every single tool and we're going to dive on it. But then by doing so, you accept the risks. I think probably the majority of schools will sit in the middle. And it's about that governance level, sitting and saying, right, what are the risks? What are the benefits? Do we only use certain tools and ban other tools? What is our process in place for getting tools approved and authorised? Do we have a working party or group that's exploring these technologies? Do we have, do we have any form of monitoring about which tools students are using and where is that being reported to? Is this being discussed by the DSL? Has it been discussed what the risks are from a safeguarding point of view? And I think actually safeguarding is an interesting one, because I think there's a lot of evidence starting to come through regarding students using AI-based chatbots to deal with kind of pastoral issues and personal issues and things like that. Well, are we comfortable with that? Is there a risk of bias and misinformation, disinformation result? If there is, how are we dealing with it? Are we speaking to students about it? So I'd say governance to start with, having your policies, etc. in place, education, and that's education with the wider community, with parents, it's with students, it's with staff. Do the majority of teachers within your at school understand the benefits and potential, how they can use it? Is that knowledge being shared? And from there, I think the other thing is, I don't think there are any AI experts at the moment. It's still an evolving technology. So it's have you also got processes to continually be reviewing this and updating policies and your guidelines, updating the training, sharing that knowledge?
Because I think that's quite an interesting point, that some schools have more experience with AI than others. Some schools have an AI ambassador. Some schools already have an appointed AI lead. But then there are some schools that may have no one in the school community who has ever had an interest in this. Where do they start?
I think one thing I will say is that schools obviously have different priorities. And, if a school, for example, is dealing with dilapidated buildings or poor behaviour, then rightly so, that should be their focus rather than trying to make use of AI to enhance teaching and learning. I think that's important. Assuming that it is identified as a priority, where to start. The funny thing is, there are lots of resources already online about tools. There are lots of people sharing their thoughts regarding tools that are available. There are also lots of the tools available within the major productivity platforms. And therefore start there. I would say, you've got AI within Microsoft, you've got, so that in Copilot, you've got AI within Google in terms of Gemini. Maybe start there, because you've already got them pretty much. Start there. Canva, I think, is a fantastic resource provided free to schools. It's got AI to explore something there. There are some easy places to get started. And then you build from there. I do think there's a massive amount of wisdom in the kind of educational world, but people are sharing that. And it is just a case of dip into that. It doesn't have to be amazing things. You start small and go from there.
One of the fears, I think, that I've heard a lot from school teachers, from parents, from I think the wider community in general, is academic integrity. How do we stop students from cheating? How do we stop them from copying? How can we make sure that what they're giving us is their own work? Where do you stand on that topic?
I think it's a really, really interesting topic. And first, it's about this AI used for cheating. But the question I've often asked people is that, do we allow students to submit a bit of coursework where they've used a grammar checker or a spelling checker, or they've used, in Word you've got editor and it tells you about your writing style and how it gives you advice on how you might improve that. Is that okay? That's AI. Spell checker, grammar checker is AI. That's been acceptable and been used for years. So why is Grammarly less acceptable, or using ChatGPT, to help, less acceptable? I think what we've got to sort of establish is I think we've got to reframe the narrative. What students are not doing a piece of coursework. It's not a case of you've got to do this piece of coursework for your GCSE computer science or for your history. What you've got to do is you're doing a piece of coursework to evidence your learning in that subject. And I think we need to go back to that, reframe the narrative around evidencing learning. At which point a teacher can easily say, you've submitted this bit of coursework to evidence your learning, and I am not convinced that it represents your learning. So therefore, can you just explain this for me? At that point, I think we've taken a step forward. I think at the moment the challenge is, which of us, if we were given a task, who wouldn't want to do it quicker and better? And that's what ChatGPT, that's what, Claude, Copilot, Gemini, all around. They allow us to do it better and quicker. Why wouldn't we use it? So I think we've got to reframe the narrative. It's about evidence and learning. And I think we've also got to question, maybe we've got to look at our methods of assessment and change them to accommodate for the fact we now live in a world where large language models are available. They are here. And whether, back to the conversation about kind of blocking, whether we block, these tools or not, doesn't matter. The students are using them anyway. They'll use them at home. They'll use them on their mobile phones. They might take the data, take the results and put it in Google Drive or OneDrive or email themselves. They're in use anyway, whether we block or not. So I think we've got to deal with that, and I do think that's the solution. It's reframe the narrative and work from there.
So on top of reframing the narrative, which I think is a really key point, because what are we testing? When you're talking about using Grammarly, a lot of the time I guess we're testing their ability to create an essay as opposed to their ability to use the present perfect. And so that's where we need to reframe it. What is it? And you say the evidence in learning. So what would be 2 other pieces of guidance that you would suggest to schools who have decided not to block generative AI? Got one, which is they need to start reframing the way in which they are assessing. What would 2 other key points be?
I think, and I suppose it links to the kind of reframing the narrative. It is making it clear with students and with parents as to what is deemed acceptable and what is deemed not acceptable. And I think schools have got to, I think we're already seeing it. It's more common. I'm definitely hearing conversations of, this piece of work isn't representative of the student's learning. It's plagiarized, or they've used AI. I'm seeing those conversations appear more often. So if we accept that it is going to happen more often, we've got to be prepared and have the processes in place and be tested about, on this. And we will get the situation where, we will be saying, well, I believe that this piece of work isn't representative of your learning. And then the student says, well, yes, it is. I did it all on my own. And the parent will, we need to make sure we work through those processes. How will that all be worked out? What will happen? So I think that's going to be one of the keys. As to a second, I think, again, it's just back to the education bit and actually discussing with students about, generative AI tools, the benefits, the risks. And maybe I think in that there's a really good discussion about the ethics. I don't like the word, using generative AI to cheat. I don't like the term cheating, because I think you can use generative AI to submit coursework and not be cheating. I think you can use it genuinely. But I think there is a good ethics discussion. If a student is using generative AI and presenting that as their own work. Ethically, who are they cheating? Are they cheating the school, or are they cheating themselves? You know, because if they've evidence that they've learned this particular topic or concept, and then they haven't, and then that leads to a career moving forward, could that cause issues in the future? So I think it's a really good discussion, and I definitely think there's a need to engage with students and have the discussion about, you know, the AI, the benefits, the risks, the challenges, what's right, what's not right, including in relation to where they're submitting coursework or homework or other things.
Well, I think we're in quite exciting and quite challenging times when it comes to education, and this is a really interesting look at AI, and I think what's coming for a lot of schools. Thank you ever so much for joining us today, Gary.
Thank you very much.
And of course, thank you so much to our listeners. If you're not yet a member of the National College, now's the perfect time to join thousands of schools across the country, accessing expert-led professional development, compliance management, people development, and now teacher and leader AI, all in one place.